Wednesday, first Wednesday in August, Bible study day. We're going to look at something fairly quick. This is just mostly for just to pique your interest in thinking more about the culture that went around during the time of Jesus. Okay, we've got John, Gospel of John, chapter 8, verses 3 through 11. Most of you know this story. Okay, the scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and making her stand before all of them, they said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now, in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now, what do you say?" They said this to test him, so that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." And once again he bent down and wrote on the ground. Now when they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the elders, and Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus straightened up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, sir." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go your way, and from now on, do not sin again." Just two quick things today. Number one, the idea that Jesus bends down and writes on the ground is sometimes we wouldn't know exactly, well, why would that even be in the story? So what's going on? And people have speculated all kinds of stuff that he wrote. In some research, studying the culture and the way that the first century Jews interpreted all the laws and all the commandments, they had decided that you couldn't write on the Sabbath with a pen that made a permanent, like you couldn't write on a scroll or something and make a permanent writing, meaning you couldn't write something that would be permanent. But you could, if you needed to, you could draw or write in the dust, the fine dust that would be on top of the street, or on top of a table, or on top of a surface out in the community. But so you could write in that fine dust, but it had to be the type of dust that the wind could blow in, and then the next time there was a strong wind, the wind could blow that dust away. So that was considered not permanent, meaning if you needed to like draw something or write something, you could do it in that fine wind-driven dust. You couldn't write it down on in a fixed form on a scroll with a pen, but you could write with your finger in that wind-driven dust. Thought that was interesting just to pass on, so that when Jesus bends down, he writes this, and a lot of the people that study the Gospels, they think that he bent down and actually wrote either the verse or some indication that he knew the verse that they were referring to in the Old Testament, where Moses made such a commandment. But he does a couple of things. Number one is by only writing, this is what they believe happened. He only wrote in that certain type of dust, and he wrote something that indicated he knew where in the Old Testament the scribes and the Pharisees were referring to the Moses commandment. So he basically was saying, I know the commandment and I know the contemporary interpretation of that commandment. So meaning I know all things. I know what you're referring to Moses and the law. I actually know what that is. I know what Moses said, and I know what you have interpreted through the years, what that to mean. So he's basically saying, I actually know what you're referring to. Well, when he gets up, then he says, any without sin can cast the first stone. So he makes a reference to the commandment of Moses, showing that he does know what the law says. Then he stands up and he says, you can carry out this commandment, but whoever is without sin can start it. Now that's interesting, because that wouldn't necessarily be part of the original written commandment, that the only person that could carry out justice and enforce the rules of their community, with Moses, it wouldn't necessarily mean that the only person that could carry that out would be a sinless person, because no one in Israel would be considered sinless. So what he's saying is, this is the law. But I say to you, any of you without sin, cast the first stone. Well, of course, they all leave. Now we're going to move to kind of another step in this process, where he kind of shows his superiority in understanding what the law was supposed to do. Now then he turns to the woman and he says to the woman, who is left that condemns you? And she says, no one. So he does this. He says, I do not condemn you. Go now and sin no more. Here's what's happened. He has proved he is the final authority on the law, that how he understands the law and how he is going to explain the law to us is the final authority on how the law is to be used. Remember, the law is a teaching or a tool that God gives us to show us how to live, and how to live in such a way that pleases God. So Jesus shows he is basically the utmost authority on what the law is. Then he says to the woman, I don't condemn you, but go and sin no more. In the midst of all this, he had made that comment that anyone without sin can cast the first stone. Well, here's the interesting point that I discovered with some of the folks that study this. They were saying, and it came true, Jesus, who is without sin, did cast the first stone. According to Moses, this woman was supposed to be stoned. Jesus says the one without sin can cast the first stone. So Jesus, being without sin now, he cast the first stone not at the woman, but at the sin in the woman. Now you see how this takes this story to another level? If we begin to put all the little pieces together, what we find is that Jesus takes the law and moves it from condemning people to condemning sin. Jesus actually fulfills what he said there. The person without sin did cast the first stone, and actually the only stone. But because Jesus knows the true meaning of the law, Jesus casts the stone at the woman's sin, not the woman. Now that is real good teaching right there. That our goal as Christians is to reveal the good news of Jesus Christ. And the good news of Jesus Christ is Jesus cast a stone at the sin in our lives, not at us. Jesus wants to conquer the sin that is keeping us from God. So think about that. Jesus is right there, has been proven to be the ultimate authority on what God's law was supposed to accomplish. And he basically demonstrates that what God's law was supposed to accomplish was to remove the sin from us. Not to remove us from God, but to remove the sin that was within us from God. So the one who was without sin did cast the first stone. But what Jesus does is he changes the target that the stone is going to be thrown at. I'll see you in church Sunday.